Commander Zekthor had been watching wars for 300 years. He had seen every kind of battle across the galaxy. Big wars, small wars, smart wars, stupid wars. He thought he had seen everything. He was wrong. The Galactic Council gave him a new job. They wanted him to watch humans fight for the first time. Humans were new to space. They had only been traveling between stars for about 50 years. Most species in the galaxy thought humans were weak and primitive. Their ships were slow. Their weapons were old-fashioned. Their technology was borrowed from other species who felt sorry for them. Zekthor sat in his observation station above a moon called Helios 7. Down below, 15,000 human families lived in a small colony. They grew food and mined minerals. They were simple people trying to make a life on a new world. But now they were in terrible danger. The Chakran were coming. The Chakran were bad news for everyone in the galaxy. They were cruel, powerful, and they never lost battles. When the Chakran wanted something, they took it. When someone was in their way, they killed them. Simple as that. The Chakran had won every single ground battle in recorded history. Every single one. 8,000 Chakran soldiers were marching toward the human colony. They had tanks, flying machines, and heavy weapons. They were going to kill everyone in the colony and take the moon for themselves. The Galactic Council told the humans to leave. Just pack up and go. Don't even try to fight. But humans don't listen very well. A human ship appeared in orbit. It was called the UESS Defiant. Only 3,000 human soldiers came out of that ship. 3,000 against 8,000. Zekthor checked his numbers 3 times. Yes, 3,000. The humans were outnumbered almost 3-1. They had less equipment, worse technology, and no experience fighting the Chakran. Colonel Jake Morrison commanded the human forces. Zekthor looked at Morrison's file. The human was 42 years old. He had fought in several wars on Earth before coming to space. He had medals for bravery. He had scars from many battles. His eyes in the photos looked tired but determined. The Council's military computers calculated the outcome of the battle. They gave the humans a 4% chance of success. 4%. Most likely outcome was complete destruction of the human force within 12 hours. Second most likely outcome was retreat within 6 hours. The computers had never been wrong before. Zekthor prepared his recording equipment. He would document another predictable battle. He would watch the humans realize they were outmatched. He would see them run away or die bravely. Then he would write his report and move on to the next assignment. 300 years of watching wars had made him good at predicting what would happen. The Chakran commander was named Vorak. He was a veteran with 40 successful campaigns. 40 times he had won. 40 times his enemies had fallen before him. He deployed his forces with perfect precision. Heavy assault troops in the front, armor support in the middle, flying units covering from above, artillery in the back. It was textbook military strategy. Beautiful in its efficiency. Zekthor watched Colonel Morrison's response. The human officer did something that made no sense at all. Instead of gathering his soldiers together to defend the colony, Morrison split them apart. He divided his 3,000 soldiers into small groups of 10 or 20. Then he sent them out into the volcanic hills around the colony. They scattered like insects running from light. Every military manual in the galaxy said this was wrong. You never divide your force when you're already outnumbered. You concentrate your strength. You find a good defensive position. You make the enemy come to you. Breaking into small groups meant the enemy could destroy you piece by piece. It was tactical suicide. Zekthor made notes in his report. The human commander was making fatal mistakes already. The battle would be over even faster than predicted. He almost felt sorry for them. They had come all this way to die for nothing. The Chakran advanced in perfect formation. Their first patrol, 30 soldiers strong, moved into the volcanic hills. They were looking for the scattered human groups. They would find them, destroy them, and move on. Simple. Sergeant Lisa Grant was waiting with her squad. 9 humans hiding in the rocks, 9 against 30. Zekthor expected the humans to hide or run. Instead, they attacked. The fight lasted 4 minutes. Zekthor watched in confusion as the humans moved with incredible speed and aggression. They didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like wild animals protecting their young. They shot, moved, shot again. They worked together like they shared one mind. When one human was injured, another immediately covered their position. When the dust settled, all 30 Chakran lay dead on the ground. 2 humans were wounded but still fighting. Not a single human had retreated or died. Zekthor checked his sensors. Maybe they had malfunctioned. He ran diagnostics. Everything was working perfectly. He had just watched 9 humans destroy a force 3 times their size. That wasn't supposed to be possible. Then it happened again. And again! All across the battlefield, small human groups were ambushing Chakran patrols. The humans would attack, disappear into the rocks, then attack again somewhere else. They were like ghosts made of anger and bullets. Lieutenant Kyle Hayes led his squad against a Chakran command bunker. The bunker was supposed to be impregnable. Heavy armor, multiple firing positions, clear fields of view. Hayes and his 20 soldiers went straight at it. When they ran out of bullets, they pulled out knives and kept fighting. They won. Zekthor started noting strange details in his report. The humans showed no fear response. Their heart rates were elevated but steady. Their movements were controlled but aggressive. Where other species would fall back to regroup, humans pushed forward. Where logic said surrender, they attacked harder. He zoomed in on a young human named Danny Torres. The private was maybe 20 years old. He had been shot twice in the chest. His armor had stopped the bullets, but he had cracked ribs. He should have been on the ground crying for medical help. Instead, he was still advancing on the enemy position. His face wasn't twisted in pain or fear. It showed pure rage mixed with iron determination. The Chakran commander sent a message requesting reinforcements. In 40 campaigns, Vorak had never asked for help before. Now he was asking for more soldiers to fight 3,000 humans. Zekthor sat back in his observation chair. His hands were shaking slightly. He had been wrong about everything. These humans weren't weak or primitive. They were something else entirely. Something dangerous. Something that didn't follow the normal rules of warfare. He couldn't sleep that night. He kept watching the recordings. Those human eyes. That determination. That absolute refusal to accept defeat. He had seen hundreds of species fight. None of them fought like this. Commander Zekthor suddenly realized he wasn't watching a battle anymore. He was watching something that would change the entire galaxy's understanding of warfare, and it terrified him. Hour 6 came and went. The humans didn't retreat. Hour 12 arrived. The humans weren't destroyed. Zekthor kept checking his equipment. Everything was working fine. The impossible was happening right in front of his eyes. The Chakran had committed 6,000 soldiers now. They outnumbered the humans 2 to 1. They had better weapons, better armor, better technology. By every measure, they should have been winning easily. Instead, they were dying in the volcanic hills of Helios 7. Captain Amy Brooks led a company of 80 Marines. She had been given an impossible mission. A Chakran artillery position sat on top of a cliff. The cliff was 300 feet of straight volcanic rock, smooth, almost no handholds. The Chakran had put their artillery up there because nobody could reach it. They thought it was completely safe. Brooks looked at the cliff. She looked at her Marines. She said 5 words that Zekthor would never forget. "We need to be up there." Then she started climbing, in the dark, with full combat gear. Her soldiers followed without question. They climbed for 2 hours straight. Zekthor watched through night vision sensors. He saw them slip, catch themselves, keep climbing. He saw them help each other up difficult sections. He saw one Marine fall 20 feet, hit a ledge, get up and start climbing again. The Chakran never expected an attack from below. When Brooks and her Marines came over the top of the cliff, the Chakran artillery crews were eating dinner. The battle lasted 6 minutes. The humans captured every artillery piece without losing a single soldier. Brooks sent a message to Colonel Morrison with just 2 words. Position secured. When Chakran Command asked their artillery why they had stopped firing, they got no answer, because everyone at that position was dead or captured. The Chakran commander, Vorak, stared at his tactical display. A human force had climbed an unclimbable cliff and destroyed his artillery. He started to feel something he had never felt in 40 campaigns. He started to feel worried. Lieutenant Ben Cooper was 28 years old. He led a platoon of 35 Marines. They had been pushing deep into Chakran territory, causing chaos behind enemy lines. But the Chakran finally cornered them in an old, collapsed mining facility. 300 Chakran soldiers surrounded the mine entrance. Cooper and his platoon were trapped inside with no way out. Vorak himself spoke to Cooper over the radio. He offered terms. Surrender now and die quickly. Fight and die slowly with great pain. Every species in the galaxy would have surrendered. Quick death was better than slow death. It was logical, Cooper's response was simple. How about you come in here and find out what happens? Sekthor couldn't believe what he was hearing. The human was outnumbered almost 10 to 1. He was trapped with no escape, and he was challenging the enemy to come fight him. It made no sense. It was insane. The Chakran went in. They had 300 soldiers. They had the humans trapped. They had every advantage. What could possibly go wrong? Everything went wrong. The humans had turned the mining tunnels into a death trap. They had rigged explosives in the ceiling. They had created ambush points in every corner. They had set up crossing fields of fire in the narrow passages. When the Chakran came in, they walked into hell. The battle inside the mine lasted 47 minutes. Sekthor recorded every second. He watched the humans fight with a ferocity he had never seen before. They used the narrow tunnels perfectly. When Chakran soldiers came around a corner, humans were waiting with knives and close-range weapons. When the Chakran tried to use explosives, the humans had already moved to different positions. Private Kelly Mason was a small woman, maybe 5 foot 4 inches tall. Sekthor watched her take down 3 Chakran soldiers who were each twice her size. She moved like water, fast and flowing. When her rifle ran out of bullets, she used it as a club. When it broke, she pulled out a knife. She didn't stop fighting until all 3 Chakran were dead. Sergeant Chris Murphy had been shot in the leg. He couldn't walk properly. He sat in a doorway and held his position for 15 minutes. 20 Chakran soldiers tried to get past him. All 20 died. Murphy ran out of ammunition and started throwing rocks. Big volcanic rocks that cracked Chakran armor and broke bones. When Chakran reinforcements finally broke through to the center of the mine, they found Lieutenant Cooper and 12 of his Marines still standing. The tunnels behind them were filled with Chakran bodies. Sekthor counted them later. 268 dead Chakran. 35 humans had killed 268 enemy soldiers in close-quarters combat. Cooper had lost an eye in the fighting. Blood covered half his face. He could barely stand up. But when Colonel Morrison asked for a status report, Cooper gave him 2 words. Position held. The Chakran started making mistakes. They began checking their flanks constantly. They jumped at shadows. Their formations became tighter, more defensive. They stopped advancing and started reacting. Sekthor recognized the signs. The Chakran were afraid. For the first time in their military history, the Chakran were scared of their enemy. Vorak couldn't understand it. He had fought the Kryn hive fleets. He had battled the Vorath warrior clans. He had defeated the synthetic armies. All of them had been tough opponents. But they had all been logical. They fought to win. When winning became impossible, they retreated or surrendered. That was how war worked. These humans didn't care about logic. They didn't care about impossible odds. They just kept coming. You could shoot them and they kept coming. You could surround them and they kept fighting. You could offer them mercy and they laughed at you. What kind of species fought like this? Sekthor pulled up psychological profiles on the humans he was watching. He wanted to understand what was wrong with them. But there was nothing wrong. These weren't crazy humans. They weren't drugged or mind-controlled. They were just regular human soldiers doing their jobs. Private Danny Torres, the young man Sekthor had watched earlier, was sitting behind a rock reloading his weapon. He had been in continuous combat for 14 hours. He had been wounded 3 times. His hands were steady. His eyes were clear. He wasn't panicking or breaking down. He was just reloading his weapon and getting ready to fight again. Sekthor checked human stress hormones. They were elevated but not critical. Human combat effectiveness wasn't decreasing. If anything, they seemed to be getting more efficient as the battle went on. They were learning, adapting, improving. This wasn't desperation. This was determination. He pulled up human history files. He started reading about Earth wars. World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. Page after page of humans fighting impossible battles, defending positions they couldn't hold, attacking enemies they couldn't beat, taking casualties that should have broken them, and winning anyway. There was a human saying he found repeated over and over in their military history. Pain is temporary. Pride is forever. Another one. When the going gets tough, the tough get going. And another. Never give up. Never surrender. These weren't just slogans. This was how humans actually thought. They believed that suffering made them stronger. They believed that impossible challenges were opportunities to prove themselves. They taught their children stories about heroes who won by refusing to quit. Zekthor realized something that made his blood run cold. Every species in the galaxy tried to avoid suffering. It was logical. Pain was bad. Defeat was bad. You tried to minimize damage to yourself and your people. That was basic survival instinct. Humans were different. They ran toward the pain. They volunteered for the hardest missions. They competed to see who could endure the most. Their military training was designed to break them physically and mentally, and they called it building character. They were crazy. The whole species was absolutely insane, and they were winning. At hour 30, Vorak made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He ordered a full retreat. The Chakran were leaving Helios 7. They were abandoning the moon to the humans. The undefeated Chakran were running away. 3,000 humans had broken 8,000 Chakran soldiers. The impossible had become real. Zekthor watched the Chakran ships leave orbit. He watched the humans secure the colony. He watched them start rescue operations before they had even treated their own wounded. Commander Zekthor had been wrong about everything. These humans weren't weak or primitive. They were the most dangerous species he had ever encountered. And the worst part was that they didn't even seem to realize how terrifying they were. To them, this was just another Tuesday. The battle was over, but Zekthor couldn't leave. He had to understand what he had just witnessed. He needed to know if what he saw was real or some kind of mistake. So he stayed in orbit above Helios 7 for 3 more days. He watched the humans during the aftermath. This was where they would finally break down. This was where the trauma would show itself. He was certain of it. He was wrong again. The human Marines didn't celebrate their victory. They didn't rest or relax. They went straight to work rescuing trapped colonists. Buildings had collapsed during the fighting. People were buried under rubble. The Marines worked in shifts, digging through concrete and metal for 30 hours straight. They only stopped when their officers ordered them to sleep. Private Kelly Mason had personally killed 11 Chakran soldiers in brutal close combat. Zekthor expected her to be traumatized or at least exhausted. Instead, he found her in a refugee shelter reading stories to frightened children. She had bandages on her arms and a black eye, but she was making funny voices for the characters in the book. The children were laughing. Zekthor didn't understand. How could she switch from killing to caring so quickly? How could she be gentle after being so violent? It didn't match any psychological profile he had ever studied. Sergeant Chris Murphy was organizing supply distribution. The same man who had held a doorway against 20 enemies was now making sure everyone had food and water. He worked with the same intense focus he had shown in battle. When someone thanked him for saving the colony, Murphy looked confused. "I was just doing my job," he said. Zekthor decided to interview the humans. He needed to understand their thinking. He started with Murphy. "Were you afraid during the battle?" Zekthor asked. "Of course I was afraid," Murphy said. He seemed surprised by the question. "Fear keeps you alert. It makes you careful, but you don't let it stop you. You push through it and do what needs to be done. But you charged an enemy position with less than 10% chance of survival," Zekthor said. "That's not logical." Murphy thought about this for a moment. Then he shrugged. "My brothers needed me. What else was I supposed to do? Leave them to die? That's not how we work, brothers." The humans kept using that word. They weren't actually related by blood, but they called each other brother and sister. They treated their squad mates like family. They would die for each other without hesitation. Zekthor interviewed Lieutenant Ben Cooper next. Cooper had lost an eye in the mine battle. He had a patch over it now. He would need surgery to get a replacement, but he wasn't complaining about it. "Tell me about the mine," Zekthor said. "Why didn't you surrender?" Cooper looked at him like he was stupid. "They would have killed us anyway," Cooper said. "The Chakran don't take prisoners. So we had 2 choices, die on our knees or die on our feet. We chose feet. At least that way we took a bunch of them with us." "But you didn't die," Zekthor pointed out. "Yeah, that was a nice bonus," Cooper said with a slight smile. "But we weren't planning on surviving. We were planning on making them pay the highest price possible. Turns out we made them pay and survived. Win-win." This was insane. Cooper had led his platoon into a fight expecting to die. He had accepted death as the probable outcome. But instead of breaking down or panicking, that acceptance had made him more dangerous. When you have nothing to lose, you fight without holding back. Zekthor asked about the fallen. 147 humans had died in the battle. That was almost 5% of their force. Surely this would affect morale. Captain Amy Brooks, the woman who had climbed the impossible cliff, spoke about the dead with deep sadness. But not despair. We honor them by finishing the job, she said. They died protecting these people. We make sure their sacrifice meant something. We save every colonist we can. We rebuild what was destroyed. We show the galaxy that humans keep their promises. That's how we remember them. Lieutenant Kyle Hayes had lost 6 members of his squad. Zekthor found him writing letters to their families. Hayes' hands shook as he wrote. Tears ran down his face. But his words were strong. He wrote about each soldier's courage. He told their families how they had saved lives. He promised that their loved ones had died as heroes. It never gets easier, Hayes told Zekthor. Losing people you love, people you fought beside. But you carry them with you. You remember them. And you make sure you're worthy of their sacrifice. Zekthor was starting to see a pattern. Humans turned grief into determination. They turned fear into aggression. They turned suffering into strength. Everything that should break them made them harder. He pulled up more human history. He read about a battle called Thermopylae. 300 humans holding a narrow pass against thousands of enemies. They all died, but they stopped the enemy advance. Humans still told that story thousands of years later. He read about something called the Alamo. Less than 200 humans defending a fort against thousands. They all died, but they became legends. Humans taught their children about the Alamo. They said, remember the Alamo, when they wanted to inspire courage. There were hundreds of these stories. Thousands. Humans loved stories about brave last stands, about impossible odds, about heroes who refused to surrender. These stories weren't warnings about the cost of war. They were inspiration. They were goals to live up to. What kind of species celebrates glorious defeat? What kind of people tell their children that dying bravely is better than living safely? It was backwards. It was illogical. It was terrifying, but it worked. It worked incredibly well. Zekthor watched Private Danny Torres help an elderly colonist move furniture. Torres had been shot twice during the battle. He had cracked ribs and severe bruising. He should have been in the medical bay. Instead, he was lifting heavy objects and smiling at the old man's jokes. Doesn't that hurt? Zekthor asked. Yeah, it hurts, Torres said. But pain is just pain. It'll heal. This guy needs his home fixed now. I can rest later, always later. Humans never seemed to think they deserved rest until the job was completely finished. Their job was protecting people. As long as people needed help, humans kept working. Pain didn't matter. Exhaustion didn't matter. Only the mission mattered. Zekthor began compiling his observations. He had lists of behavioral traits. Extreme aggression in combat, refusal to abandon wounded, willingness to sacrifice individual safety for group benefit, ability to function under extreme stress, resistance to psychological trauma, quick recovery from physical injury, strong emotional bonds within military units, cultural emphasis on honor and duty. Every single trait was useful in warfare. It was like humans had been designed specifically for fighting, but they hadn't been designed. They had evolved this way naturally. Their homeworld, Earth, must have been incredibly dangerous. Only the toughest, most stubborn, most cooperative humans had survived. Generation after generation, the weak ones died and the strong ones passed on their genes. The result was a species that excelled at violence, but also at caring. They could kill efficiently and then comfort children gently. They could charge into enemy fire and then organize supply distribution. They were walking contradictions, warriors and healers, aggressive and compassionate, terrifying and kind. Colonel Jake Morrison gave a speech to his Marines 3 days after the battle. Zekthor recorded every word. We came here to do a job, Morrison said. Protect innocent people from those who would harm them. We did that job. Some of us paid the ultimate price. We honor them. We remember them. And we continue their mission. Because that's what humans do. We protect those who can't protect themselves. We stand between the innocent and danger. We don't quit. We don't surrender. We don't give up, ever. The Marines cheered, not with wild celebration, but with quiet determination. They understood. This wasn't the last battle. There would be more. More danger, more sacrifice, more pain, and they would face it all willingly because that was their purpose. Zekthor realized something that chilled him to his core. This wasn't special forces. This wasn't an elite unit. These were regular human Marines. Average soldiers. If this was normal for humans, what were their special forces like? What could their best warriors do? He didn't want to know. He truly didn't want to know. The Galactic Council needed to hear about this. They needed to understand what humanity represented. Not a threat to be eliminated. That would be impossible. But a force to be carefully allied with. Because any species that made enemies of humans would learn the same lesson the Chakran had learned. You could beat humans, but the cost would be so high that victory would feel like defeat. Because humans didn't know how to quit. They only knew how to fight harder. Zekthor spent his final day on Helios 7 walking through the colony with the humans. He wanted to see them interact with the people they had saved. He wanted to understand the relationship between human soldiers and human civilians. What he found surprised him yet again. The colonists treated the Marines like family. They invited them into their homes. They shared meals. They introduced the soldiers to their children. There was no barrier between military and civilian. They were all just humans taking care of each other. A woman named Patricia Coleman invited Sergeant Murphy to dinner. Her home had been damaged in the fighting, but she had managed to prepare a meal anyway. Murphy sat at her table with her husband and 3 children. They talked about normal things. The weather, the crops, the children's school. Murphy was completely relaxed. The same man who had killed dozens of enemies was now laughing at a 6-year-old's joke about a space cow. "Why do you fight?" Patricia asked Murphy during dinner. "Why risk your life for people you don't even know?" Murphy looked at the 3 children eating their food. He smiled. "Because of them," he said simply. "Because every person in this colony is somebody's child, somebody's parent, somebody's friend. You're all real people with real lives. And if we don't protect you, who will? That's the deal. We wear the uniform. We carry the weapons. We stand between you and danger. That's our job. And honestly, it's an honor to do it." Zekthor watched Patricia Coleman start crying. Murphy looked concerned until she explained that those were happy tears. She was grateful. She was proud. She was emotional because a stranger had risked his life to save her family. This was the key, Zekthor realized. Human soldiers didn't fight for territory or resources or glory. They fought for other humans. It was personal. Every mission was about protecting real people with real lives. That's why they couldn't give up. That's why they pushed through pain and fear. Because giving up meant letting innocent people die. He interviewed more colonists. A man named Robert Hayes told him about watching the Marines arrive. "We thought we were dead," Robert said. "The Chakran were coming and everyone said they were unstoppable. Then we saw those Marines landing. Only 3,000 of them. We thought they were crazy. But you know what one of them told me? This young woman couldn't have been more than 25. She said, 'Don't worry, sir. We're here now. They'll have to go through us to get to you.' And she meant it. You could see it in her eyes. She would die before letting them hurt us." "Were you afraid they would fail?" Zekthor asked. "At first, yes," Robert admitted. "But then we watched them prepare. They were so calm, so professional. They weren't afraid. They were ready. And we started to believe. If they believed they could win, maybe they actually could. And they did. Those magnificent humans did the impossible." Zekthor found that word interesting. Magnificent. The colonists saw their protectors as magnificent, not just brave or skilled. Magnificent, like they were something special, something extraordinary. Maybe they were right. He interviewed Private Kelly Mason about reading to the children. She was sitting outside a shelter surrounded by kids asking for another story. "Why do you spend your free time with children?" Zekthor asked. "You should be resting." "I'll rest when they don't need me anymore," Kelly said. "These kids went through something terrifying. They heard gunfire. They saw explosions. Some of them saw people die. They need to know they're safe now. They need to see that the scary soldiers are actually just people who care about them. If I can help them feel better by reading stories, that's an easy choice." One little boy, maybe 7 years old, tugged on Kelly's sleeve. "Are you a hero?" he asked. Kelly smiled. "Nobody. I'm just a Marine doing my job. The real heroes are the people who stayed calm and took care of each other during the scary parts. People like your mom and dad. They're the brave ones," but the boy disagreed. "My dad said you climbed a cliff and captured the big guns. He said that's the bravest thing he ever heard of." "That was Captain Brooks, right?" "Captain Brooks led that mission," Kelly confirmed. "And yes, we climbed a cliff. But we did it because we had to. That's what you do when people need help. You figure out what needs to be done and you do it, no matter how hard it is. The boy thought about this seriously. Then he nodded. When I grow up, I want to be a Marine like you. Kelly's expression became sad for just a moment. Then she smiled again. If you do become a Marine, remember this. We fight so that others don't have to. We suffer so that others can be happy. We face danger so that others can feel safe. That's the job. It's hard and it hurts sometimes. But it's worth it. Every single time. Sekthor was beginning to understand human military culture. It wasn't about violence or dominance. It was about service, about sacrifice, about standing between innocent people and harm. Human soldiers saw themselves as protectors first and warriors second. That distinction mattered. He pulled up recruitment materials from human military organizations. The slogans were telling. Protect and defend. Service before self. The few, the proud. Always faithful. Every single slogan emphasized duty and loyalty. Not conquest. Not glory. Not personal gain. Just service. Human warriors were taught from the beginning that their job was to suffer for others. To endure hardship so others didn't have to face death so others could live, and millions of humans volunteered for this role. They competed for the chance to serve. They were proud to be selected. Lieutenant Hayes finished his letters to the families. He had written 17 pages by hand, detailed descriptions of how their loved ones had lived and fought and died with honor. Each letter was personal. Each one contained specific stories and memories. He had spent hours on them when he could have been sleeping. Why write so much? Sekthor asked. A simple notification would be sufficient. Hayes looked at him with something like pity. These families just lost someone they love. The least I can do is tell them exactly how brave their son or daughter or husband or wife was. I tell them about the jokes they told, the courage they showed, the lives they saved. I tell them that their loved one mattered, that they died doing something important, that they were heroes, because they were. Every single one of them. He sealed the letters carefully. When I die, I hope someone takes this much care with my family. That's the least we owe each other. Sekthor asked his final question to Colonel Morrison, the question that had been bothering him since the battle ended. How do you keep fighting when the odds are against you? How do you push through fear and pain and exhaustion? Morrison thought for a long moment before answering. There's an old human saying, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite the fear. We're not fearless. We're scared most of the time, but we act anyway because the mission matters more than our feelings. As for pain and exhaustion, those are temporary. They heal. But if we quit, people die. That's permanent. So we don't quit. We can't quit. Not while people need us. But surely there's a limit, Sekthor pressed. A point where you can't continue. Morrison smiled grimly. Sure, there's a limit, death. Until we're dead, we can keep fighting. Humans have this stubborn streak. We don't like being told something is impossible. When someone says we can't do something, we take that as a challenge. Tell us we can't win, we'll prove you wrong. Tell us we can't survive, watch us anyway. Tell us to give up, we'll fight harder. It's just how we're built. Sekthor had all the information he needed. He had witnessed something that would change galactic history. He had seen humans fight for the first time, and it had been both awe-inspiring and horrifying. As he prepared to leave Helios 7, he watched the Marines forming up for their departure. They were going back to their ship, back to training, back to preparing for the next mission. Because there would always be a next mission. Always more people who needed protection. Always more dangers to face. They marched in formation, tired but proud, wounded but unbroken. They had done the impossible, and they treated it like just another day at work, because for them it was. 3 weeks later, Sekthor stood before the Galactic Council. Representatives from 24 species filled the chamber. They had all read his preliminary report. Most thought he was exaggerating. Some thought he was lying. A few thought he had gone insane from stress. None of them wanted to believe what he had witnessed. Commander Sekthor, the council chairman began. Your report about the human military performance on Helios 7 contains several claims that seem improbable. Please provide evidence for your conclusions. Sekthor activated the holographic display. Combat footage filled the chamber. The council members watched in silence as 9 humans destroyed 30 Chakran soldiers. They watched humans climb an impossible cliff. They watched Lieutenant Cooper's last stand in the mining tunnels. They watched everything. When the footage ended, the chamber remained silent for a full minute. This cannot be representative of normal human behavior, a council member finally said. These must be elite special forces, enhanced soldiers, some kind of experimental unit. No, Zekthor replied firmly. These were regular Marines, average human soldiers. I verified their service records. None of them were enhanced. None of them were special operations. They were just normal humans doing their jobs. Then humanity represents a serious military threat, another council member suggested. We should consider containment protocols. Zekthor felt a chill run through his body. With respect, council member, containment is impossible. Humanity has a population of 20 billion spread across 40 worlds. They have a military force of approximately 5 million active soldiers. Based on what I observed, those 5 million soldiers could defeat any conventional force we could assemble. And if we tried to contain them militarily, they would fight us with everything they have. They don't surrender. They don't negotiate when threatened. They just fight harder. He pulled up the casualty statistics. In 3,000 years of recorded galactic warfare, no species has ever maintained offensive operations after sustaining 40% casualties. Most species begin retreat procedures at 15% losses. The Chakran, considered the most militarily effective species in known space, have never continued an attack after taking 20% casualties. Zekthor changed the display to show human military history. Humans have historical records of units that continued fighting after 70% casualties. They have documented battles where they took 90% losses and still achieved their objectives. They have a word for this. They call it determination. We would call it insanity. But it works. A council member from the Vorath species spoke up. Surely they have some weakness, some vulnerability we can exploit if necessary. Their only weakness is their strength, Zekthor said. They care too much. They feel too deeply. They refuse to abandon their fellow soldiers, which makes them predictable in some tactical situations. But exploiting this weakness requires killing enough of them to isolate individuals, and the cost of killing that many humans would cripple any attacking force. He pulled up psychological profiles. Let me explain how humans think about warfare. They don't see it as a chess game or a resource management problem. They see it as personal. When you kill a human soldier, their friends don't become demoralized. They become angry. They fight harder to avenge their fallen comrade. Every casualty you inflict makes the survivors more dangerous, not less. This defies basic psychology, a council member protested. Species should become more cautious after taking losses, not more aggressive. Human psychology is different, Zekthor explained. They have a cultural concept they call spite. It means enduring suffering purely to ensure your enemy suffers more. They will take tremendous damage to themselves if it means damaging their enemy. They don't calculate cost-benefit ratios in battle. They calculate how much harm they can inflict before they die, and they're very good at inflicting harm. He showed them more data, human military doctrine, human training methods, human cultural values. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. Humans were optimized for warfare in a way no other species was. They teach their children that pain builds character, Zekthor said. They volunteer for difficult missions. They compete to see who can endure the most hardship. Their military training is designed to break them physically and mentally, and they view completing this training as an achievement. They are proud of suffering. A council member laughed nervously. That's ridiculous. No species would evolve such counterproductive traits. Zekthor pulled up information about Earth. Earth is a Class 9 death world. The gravity is high. The weather is violent. The native predators are extremely dangerous. The diseases are deadly. For most of human evolution, their mortality rate was over 50% before adulthood. Only the toughest, most stubborn, most cooperative humans survived long enough to reproduce. Generation after generation, Earth filtered out weakness. What remained was a species that excels at surviving impossible situations. He showed them human sayings, human military mottos, human cultural values. The only easy day was yesterday. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Pain is temporary, pride is forever. Never give up, never surrender. These weren't just slogans. This was how humans actually thought. I recommend 3 courses of action, Zekthor concluded. First, ensure humanity remains our ally at all costs. Trade with them. Exchange culture with them. Make them our friends. Second, avoid any situation that might lead to conflict with humanity. They will not back down from threats. They will only escalate. Third, there is no third option. We either befriend them or we leave them alone. Those are the only choices that don't end in disaster. The council debated for hours. Some members still didn't believe. Others were frightened. A few were intrigued. But eventually they reached a consensus. The council would pursue a strong alliance with humanity. They would offer trade agreements, technology sharing, and mutual defense pacts. They would make humans partners, not enemies. Within weeks, the policy was implemented. Human military advisors were requested by dozens of species, not for human technology, which was still relatively primitive, but for human training methods. Everyone wanted to know how humans stayed motivated under stress, how they maintained morale after taking casualties, how they pushed through fear and pain. The answer was always the same. Humans fought for each other. They fought for a cause they believed in. They fought because quitting wasn't in their nature. You couldn't teach that. It was built into their culture, their psychology, their very being. Zekthor watched the galaxy change. Species that had been aggressive became cautious around human space. Pirates avoided human shipping lanes. Slavers stayed away from human worlds. Everyone had heard what happened on Helios 7. Everyone knew that humans would fight to protect their own. And nobody wanted to be on the receiving end of human determination. The Chakran never recovered. Their reputation as undefeatable was shattered. Other species questioned their strength. Internal political struggles weakened their empire. Within 5 years, the Chakran dominion had collapsed entirely. All because they had lost one battle to a species they underestimated. But Zekthor couldn't celebrate any of this. He still couldn't sleep properly. Every night he saw those human faces. Private Torres advancing while wounded. Captain Brooks climbing the impossible cliff. Lieutenant Cooper refusing surrender. Sergeant Murphy holding the doorway. Kelly Mason reading to children after killing enemies. He had spent 300 years studying warfare. He thought he understood violence and courage and sacrifice. Then he watched humans fight and realized he had been studying children playing games. Humans were the real thing. They were what warriors looked like when they truly meant it. He sent one final message to the council, marked as personal and unofficial. We invited predators to our table and called them friends. Let us pray they never change their minds about us. Let us never give them a reason to view us as enemies. Because if humans ever decide we are a threat to something they love, we will learn what the Chakran learned, and we will not survive the lesson. Zekthor requested a transfer to a quiet archive world. He wanted to spend his remaining years cataloging historical data. Something peaceful, something far from war. He had seen enough combat for one lifetime. But he never forgot the humans. How could he? They had changed his entire understanding of what was possible. They had shown him that determination could overcome logic. That courage could defeat superior technology. That spirit could triumph over mathematics. The last thing Colonel Morrison had said to him kept echoing in his mind. Zekthor had asked if the battle on Helios 7 was personal for the humans. Morrison had looked at him with those tired, determined eyes and said something that made Zekthor's blood run cold. That wasn't personal. They threatened civilians. If they had actually hurt them, we would have followed them home. Zekthor believed him, completely. If the Chakran had killed those colonists, the humans wouldn't have stopped at Helios 7. They would have pursued. They would have hunted. They would have made the Chakran pay for every single innocent death. Not for strategy or territory or resources. For justice. For revenge. For the personal satisfaction of making their enemies suffer. That was the terrifying truth about humans. You could beat them in battle. You could kill their soldiers. You could win.